Welcome. Welcome. As you're getting seated, we are asking you to fill out the Slido. So if you could just take a picture of the QR code. We just have a few questions just to get to know you. Thank you for the background music. Welcome, distinguished colleagues. I feel like I'm a little too loud, but I'm not going to ask if you can hear me in the back of the room. So it's interesting to me, you can see that the majority are from Europe, and a second ago we had more people from, actually we have more people from Africa, which I couldn't be more delighted to see than in North America. No surprise, we're dominated by people in the water field with very few energy systems folks. And this last thing was surprising to me. I'm not surprised that we have almost nobody focusing solely on mitigation, but I find it very interesting that the majority in the room actually work on both mitigation and adaptation. And I'm really hoping to get some input for you along the way. But I wanted to start, and some of you, I'm Annette Huberly, by the way, a senior scientist with Stockholm Environment Institute, and some have heard me say this before, and please forgive me, but it hits me more profoundly each day that passes by. I heard in the opening ceremony again and again, it's the hottest day ever, it's the hottest month, it's the hottest summer, it's the worst hurricane, it's the biggest flood, it's the most rainfall. And I think we have to start reframing how we talk about the climate crisis. And what I say to my 19-year-old son, which doesn't make me happy, is this is the coolest summer you'll ever know. This is the least flooding that you'll ever experience. This is the shortest drought. This is the smallest wildfire. We have no normal anymore. Normal is gone. We live in a place of deep uncertainty, and we have to be better prepared for this. I would actually say we hear a lot about solutions, but I think it's unrealistic to talk about solutions. We should be talking about trade-offs, that things are happening so rapidly in time that there's no magic bullet out there. There's no solution. We need to understand the trade-offs and the choices and investments that we are making. Even more pressing from my perspective is the time to invest in adaptation. We're still investing 10 times more in mitigation and much less in adaptation. 20 years ago, maybe that made sense. Let's try to do our best on mitigation so we don't have to deal with adaptation. Now, it's too late. We really need to focus on adaptation. So one of the points that I wanted to make in this opening is adaptation and mitigation are deeply entwined with each other and with the macroeconomy. More and more, we're linking our biophysically based system models, WEAP, the Water Evaluation and Adaptation Planning Model, will be newly launched tomorrow, and our energy systems model, the low emissions analysis platform, with an open source macroeconomic model developed by Professor Eric Kemp-Benedict at Leeds University. And what it does is allow us to look at sort of incoming climate, whether it's and all the variability that's associated with that particular precipitation, and then how the macroeconomy can amplify or dampen or transform that variability. So here's just an illustration. I'm not going to go into any technical details at all, except to say that step by step, we're making sure the water links to the energy and the energy links to the water and agriculture are consistent with each other. And those impacts are then carried forward into the macroeconomic model. So we can actually see how a particular decision plays out. And I'll just flash a couple very quick slides here. I'm sorry, I don't know why the headline's not here, but this is basically an application here where we linked the macroeconomic model with the WEAP model for the entire country of Rwanda. And what you'll see is we have 4 different climate projections, and you can see the kind of variability it causes in the macroeconomy. So it's under this baseline condition, the rainfall and GDP are correlated because there's so much dependence on the energy, on hydropower, run-of-river hydropower, that it dominates the impact of the climate. So if you have a mitigation strategy, okay, I want to go to renewables and I want to go to hydropower, that's great. But you have to understand what are the implications of that if you don't have sufficient storage. And on top of that, it's not taking into account the ambitious goals of increasing irrigation. I have one last point I want to make. We've been doing a lot of work in Central Asia, first funded by USAID and currently funded by the World Bank, where we're looking at this integration with a macroeconomic model. So we run the models sort of standalone, energy system model, water system model, and then together. And we're able to show that there are misplaced investments on the mitigation side on the order of billions of dollars. And also we miss this opportunity. When they talk to one another, when they coordinate, there's more opportunity for additional water storage that can be then used for flood protection, for drought protection, and increasing overall food productivity. So I'm going to hand this over to, actually, I'll just go ahead, one more input from you. And the question here is, do you think ambitious mitigation targets and following actions burden adaptation efforts? So it's the same number. You don't have to re-enter each time. But for those of you just walking in, please. Oh, my goodness. Maybe give it 10 more seconds. I think it's not really clear. So we're going to move to the 3 case studies, and maybe this will shift your perception a little bit. So I'd like to introduce, I'm going to introduce the 3 speakers, but have them then come up one at a time. First, we have almost doctor, soon to be Dr. Zishan Berg, who's with the University of Oulu in Finland. He's going to be talking about the Nordic countries and this integration of mitigation and adaptation. That'll be followed by Iara Giacomini, who's with Ministry of Environment and Climate Change in Brazil. And finally, we'll end with Anderson Kabila, one of my fellow people from SEI based in Africa, a research fellow who talk about some work in Kenya. So with no further ado, Zishan.
Thank you, Annette. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the climate resilience through the nexus approach in the Nordic region, and why do we need to mitigate, why need to integrate our efforts for mitigation and adaptation. So I've got 2 cases, one from Norway and one from Finland. So the climate is changing in the Nordic regions stronger and faster. There's a phenomenon called the polar amplification, and as a result of it, the climate in the Nordic region has warmed 4 times more than the global average. You can see the Nordic region in the middle. The terrestrial water cycle in the Nordic region has also intensified, just like the global water cycle. And the Arctic ice loss is impacting the snowfall patterns in the northern hemisphere, as well as it has given rise to 27 centimeters of seawater globally. So the needs for mitigation in the Nordic regions, basically the targets that these 2 countries have set up are: Finland wants to be climate neutral, carbon neutral by 2035, and Norway has made it conditional that if other countries are going to take up efforts, then they are going to do it by 2030. Otherwise, they're going to do it in 2050. The needs for mitigation in the water sectors include the so basically in the Nordic region, there's a lot of drained peatlands, and when you drain peatlands, then they release a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a need to address this issue. In the energy sector, overall in the Nordics, we still use around 30% of fossil fuels for our energy, and 46% of that is in Norway, and in Finland is a bit less, 36%. And in the land use, land cover sector, the permafrost in these regions is melting very fast, and that's releasing more GHGs, which was previously trapped in the ground. So you can see in this figure that all of the Arctic has a lot of permafrost in it, and it's melting very fast. And there's a need to address this issue of emissions from the permafrost. So this is part of the research for my PhD. There's a case river in the Norway. It's called the Otta River Basin, and we have found that the tree line, or the forest tree line, is moving upwards in the mountains. But not only upwards, it's also going up in the latitudes. The boreal forest and the taiga forest, they are moving slightly upwards in the latitudes. And you can see in this figure the region between the vegetation line and the tree line is called the ecotone. And we found for our case that the ecotone has risen around 2.3 meters every year from 1985 to 2025. So this creates challenges, but also opportunities for the carbon balance and the national reportings which are made in the NDCs. There's an intricate balance between emissions from agriculture and the sequestration in the forest areas. Yeah, and this is the paper for it. So the needs for adaptations include, again, as Annette mentions, ambitious mitigation targets in the energy sectors. It causes adaptation needs in other sectors. So, for example, in water sectors, there's a need for river restoration now. Many dams have come to the end of their age, end of their life cycle, and they need to be removed from the rivers. This is a picture of a dam removal in a river in Finland. In the energy sector, there's a problem of grid stability and load balancing, and the need for innovative solutions for energy storage, because hydropower is, as an energy storage, is creating issues, and we're going to talk about it. In the land use, land cover sectors, there's obviously need for land use, land cover change regulation, and that's true for other parts of the world as well. So this case from the Kemijoki River in Finland is the largest river basin in Finland. What happens is, due to the variations in the energy market, the hydropower operations, they affect river ecosystem services. So this is basically an adaptation need that's coming up from the mitigation agenda, because we need more green energy, wind and solar, which provides intermittent power supply. So we need hydropower, and because of hydropower, we have river ecosystem problems. So we proposed a measure of reducing 50% reduction in downstream flow fluctuations. This graphic can try to explain a little bit. And what we found was that if we reduce it by 50%, we get around 3% improvement in the ecosystem services and only 1% reduction in hydropower profits, as well as some positive welfare for the people living in the downstream areas. But it's an important point to make that assessing cross-sectional impacts, cross-sectoral impacts of adaptation measures is very difficult. So that's why we need integrated approaches to think how our actions are going to affect climate change itself and its mitigation. Yeah, so my last slide now. In the Nordic region, we have a lot of emphasis on technology-driven solutions. And we try to fix everything with technology. And that's why probably mitigation efforts in one sector, they leads to adaptation needs in other sectors. So my premise for my PhD also is that the nexus approach, the water, energy, food, ecosystems nexus approach, it can improve resource flow accounting. It can identify areas of weak circularity, and it can guide investments as to where and when we need to adapt and mitigate. So thank you all for listening patiently, and I'll pass the floor to Annette now. Thank you.
Do we have Yara online?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Yara. So will I need to move the slides for her? Okay, so just tell me next slide, and I'll move forward. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Greetings from Brazil. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to being here. From my heart, I would like to be there in person with you, but this time wasn't possible. And I will take the lead from the colleague Zishan, which brings us that, which highlighted how big is the problem that we are facing. And I'd like to show you what Brazil is doing in a glance. But I'd like to first just say that in Brazil, we are trying to really bring adaptation and mitigation together. And to start in doing this, instead of thinking by ourselves, the first step we took was to visit some departments here in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, starting for the Climate Department and Secretary, asking them, how do you see the water could improve your agenda? How can water support your goals? And I said, we'd like to do some kind of strategy which support both adaptation and mitigation altogether. And the secretary was clear, saying, for us, you needed to plant trees, we need forests. And I said, okay. And then we went to the biodiversity department and we did the same question for them. And then we asked them, if we plant trees and make the forests alive again, does it help your agenda? And they said yes. And then we went to the combat to desertification department and we did the same. And we got that. The same answer. Yes, if you plant trees, if you recover forests in some specific areas, you also help us to implement the combat to desertification agenda. So, okay, there we go. You can move the slides, please. So after this roll of conversations, what we got that we needed to restore native vegetation. And why? Because it delivery results for mitigation and adaptation at once. Well, you can see when the mitigation is very clear, when forests are growing, the vegetation is just storing carbon by itself. So it stores and keep it there. And adaptation to improve all the water flows. It provides water for the atmospheric circulation. So we are also acting on the atmospheric and rain patterns way. And well, I think it prevents the floods and so many aspects at the same time. But then a big question came on board saying, where are we going to do this? Because Brazil is huge. So then we decided to look where these forests would improve the water cycle most, or would improve the water agenda most, and we decided to go for the riverbanks, spring wetlands, aquifer recharge areas, but also with the length of climate change impact. So we did the goal to restore we set the goal to restore 1 million hectares of this area, riverbanks, springs, wetlands, and so on, by 2031. And that's because we have a legal provision which says that riverbanks and spring and other areas connected with the water cycle, they are protected by the law. They should be conservated, but most of them are not. So that's why. You can move, please. So where did we set this goal? It was in the National Climate Plan. In Brazil, we have 16 adaptation plans. One of them is water. So yeah, unfortunately, Brazil was looking just for the adaptation. But inside the adaptation water plan, we decided to bring this goal to restore 1 million hectares of native vegetation in these specific areas. And we already have some partners here, national and international ones. And we also see additional benefits to that, which is the cultural aspects related to the water, to the spirituality of the water, and some traditions that we have in Brazil connected with the local people and the indigenous communities as well. We see a lot of connectivity between ecosystems, and also it delivers for the real conventions and Ramsar and Sendai. And here the premises that which most important to see is that we come back to look the hydrological cycle and also the water balance equation and the carbon cycle all together, and looking for this intersections area to check which actions can we do which will deliver results for both mitigation and adaptation. So far, we have investments in the order of $130 million so far. It's a lot, but it's not enough. You can move for the last slide, please. So from this point, we are working in guidelines for the environmental management of water basin, which we expect to deliver until the end of this year, and also a national program for the environment management for the river basin. So how can we help the river basin committees we have here in our water governance to deal with water in this more strategic way? And we have the water resiliency tracker supporting us. So we are using the tool to analyze the 16 thematic and sectorial NEPs that we have here. And then we start to think, should we have a water mitigation tracker as well as a tool, maybe to check how the plans are delivering in mitigation for water. And so for the next year, we hope to be delivering a national mobilization strategy to leverage all these steps that I just shared with you. So this is what I have to share. I have my email and then the last slide if someone wants to get in touch. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Iara. If you can stay on for questions for later, that'd be great. Next, I'd like to ask Anderson to come up and tell us a little about your work in Kenya.
Once more, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anderson Kebila, Research Fellow and Program Leader for Natural Resources and Climate Change for SCI Africa. So today, I will be presenting the results of a recent study that we completed on the synergies and trade-offs between mitigation and ecosystem-based adaptation in Kenya. So from a policy perspective, many African governments nowadays consider water, energy, and food as separate entities. And this has actually led to inefficient resource allocation, as well as conflicting mitigation and adaptation priorities. And this very siloed and fragmented approach is deeply entrenched within this case study area, which is the Ewasungiro North catchment that is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So the objective of this study was mainly to identify and validate the key innovative ecosystem-based adaptation solutions in this region for scaling by the local communities. And we did this by actually modeling these solutions and a lot of development scenarios, and seeing how we could mainstream these innovations into policy documents. And we did this by using our signature tool that my colleague Annette mentioned earlier, the SWIM tool, Impact for Livestock, LEAP for energy planning, and the WIP for water management. So one of the key findings we had was that there was very high demand for wood fuel, as indicated in those green colors on the bar chart. And this has actually led to increased emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, as highlighted by the red on the right-hand graph. So what we did was to actually brought in some mitigation measures in terms of incentivizing improved cook stoves and kilns, as well as clean energy solutions, in order to actually mitigate those emissions, as highlighted by the purple color on that graph. Moving on to the hydropower sector, what we actually found was that the installed capacities for the hydropowers were actually far way higher than the available water supply. And this was due to the low flow of water in this area between the months of June to September and December to March. And that low flow was actually due to decreasing discharge that was attributed to high abstraction upstream, thereby leaving very little water for hydropower generation. So these are some of the measures that we're recommending to actually address this in terms of incentivizing water-efficient technologies, enforcing water abstraction permits, and exploring other water use like grey water. Going on to, what's not changing? Yeah, going to the livestock production, what we also found was that the density of cattle, as you can see, is actually increasing, and they are right to the maximum by 2030. This also led to increasing water demand for like cattle production, thereby leading to water scarcity as well as increasing greenhouse gas emission due to enteric fermentation. So we are actually looking at how to bring in other researchers to look at selecting improved breeds for cattle in order to minimize the water need for rearing cattle, selection as well as improving breeds for fodder that are actually drought tolerant, and also last but not least implementing grazing rotations in these communities. Moving on to the crop production, what we found was that there's a new policy that the government has implemented in order to expand irrigated area by 1.3 million by 2030. So what we found was that in the master plan, if they are actually going to implement that, then water demand will actually exceed supply by the year 2030. Then what we actually tried to analyze and other measures to reduce the water demand was to look at irrigation efficiency that will reduce demand by 13%, climate-smart agriculture that has the potential to reduce water demand by 24%, and then combining both irrigation efficiency and climate-smart agriculture, there's high potential to reduce water demand by 33%. So these are some of the measures that we are actually encouraging the government of Kenya while they're expanding this irrigated agriculture to start implementing to ensure that we actually meet the water demand, meet water supply by 2030. So in the conclusion, what we are trying to say is, policymakers from the different sectors, water, energy, and food, they have to, plan in an integrated manner rather than in a siloed approach. As you've just seen here, the agricultural sector ministry is doing their thing on their own, planning for expanding irrigated area, not knowing that there won't be enough water to actually meet that demand. Also, the livestock sector is talking about, increasing livestock productivity without knowing that there won't be enough water. So by doing this integrated planning, then policymakers can now start to ensure that they're actually planning to bring about, much more sustainable solutions in the future. With that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Anderson. I'm privileged to introduce somebody who doesn't need introducing to many people in this room. John Matthews will be moderating our panel, the CEO of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. John.
Sure, thanks. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to see such a full room and what feels like a very engaged audience. I was extremely impressed, too, by the slides that we had at the beginning from the survey results, that there's this sense of tension between mitigation and adaptation, that these are trade-offs. And I want to say that there is an inherent tension, I think, that comes between these two, because they're not just unequal in terms of like where financial flows have been occurring historically, but also in the way that we measure them. If you think about climate mitigation, we measure that by thinking about carbon emissions. We can measure the carbon. Often we can do so in ways that are certified, that they're pretty rigorous. There's a whole industry that goes around certifying that process. But adaptation, resilience, it's not that easy. We can't go out and measure adaptation like we can measure air temperature. There's not a barometer for resilience. And in fact, in most cases, like the best definition I ever heard for effective adaptation, it's from a staff member and a close friend at the World Bank. He said, to me, good adaptation is better trade-offs. How do you measure trade-offs? And that fight between like something that we can measure quantitatively and something that is really squishy is a tension. And that's what we hope to be able to explore on the panel today. I think we're going to hear from institutions that are talking about this as a process. And I hope that one of the things that can kind of come from this conversation is to show maybe some change over time and then a ... like where we may be headed into the future. So I'd like to ask all of the members of the panel to come up. And we're also joined by someone online. If we could have, we're joined online by Winston Yu. He's the water practice manager for the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region at the World Bank. And his Jamali, please join us up here. He's senior climate change officer at the Asian Development Bank. Michael Alexander, a global head of climate at Diageo. And then Melissa Barandiarian, at senior sector specialist of water and sanitation at the Inter-American Development Bank. So please give them a warm welcome. The other, this segment is really focused on how we think about financing investments. And that also sounds like we should just be talking about dollar signs. And I'd like to think that maybe there are other kinds of investments too that we're making. We may be allocating staff and program time. We may be thinking about infrastructure, maybe changing also, or reallocating assets, that it's not always like a new investment with a big money sign. And I hope that we can think of investments along those terms. You also notice that we are development bank heavy in this conversation. Don't feel too awkward, Michael. But I think it's an interesting mix, and I also hope to quickly turn things over to the audience. And I'd like to start, actually, I'll start with Melissa, and then I'll come to you, and then Winston and Michael, I'll pick on you last. So, Melissa, like at the Inter-American Development Bank, you've been working in the climate space for quite a while, and I'm curious, like, what are some of the real innovations that you've seen, like programmatically, that maybe are more recent about how you try to negotiate these trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation?
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, I have worked for the bank for more than 14 years now, and I've seen a change. Definitely, for instance, now we have, as part of the institutional strategy, one of the 3 core pillars of our new institutional strategy is climate change and sustainability. All our projects are committed with climate change, and when I say projects, I'm referring to investment loans, but also policy-based loans and other type of instruments that we have. All of those need to be Paris-aligned, so we both need to act on adaptation and mitigation at the same time. But we also like to aside from the traditional loans, we also like to provide technical assistance to governments to work more on at the scale of planning, so they will be ahead and aware of time to plan ahead for climate, for both adaptation and mitigation. And having said that, in the water and sanitation, we also have we are committed to include, as part of our impact framework, an impact results matrix in projects, indicators for greenhouse gases and also for adaptation as well. We have indicators for projects that are building resilience in each of the designs, and so I think it changed a lot. It's more committed now. You can see in all of our operations now.
Yeah, that's really important. And has there been resistance to that process, or has it been more of an acceptance? Or have people been enthusiastic about the change?
I would say both sides. That's a difficult question. Well, internally, of course, when there is a change, we need to adapt quickly. But I think we all are aware that things are happening. As we were saying, we see the worst drug, and probably it will be the less worse, no, over time. So I think people in countries are feeling that already. So as opposed to be against those changes in the countries, we have partners, right, that also willing to work on that line. So it's a smoothly change, but I think we are all in this, and countries in Latin America are feeling those impacts as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And the ADB, the Asian Development Bank, you all, I think, have also been playing like a kind of multifaceted role at the kind of highest level, at a policy level. For instance, like you have a good colleague that we share, Argo, Sinha Roy. Like he sits as the co-chair of the Multilateral Development Bank, a committee that works on developing shared indicators for adaptation and resilience. A very technical process, but to make sure that there's sort of mutual disarmament too, that you all are counting the same things. At the same time, like I know that you have very integrated programs that try to align, say, like country priorities with NDCs and NAPs. How have you seen that change maybe over time in your work and program?
Thanks. So I've only been at ADB for a bit over a year, so I think change over time. I'm also a former scientist, and I still sometimes introduce myself that I'm working for CSIRO, which I'm not now. But just point being, I'm one of you. So I think the shift, what I've seen, and I've been part of, I've joined since that shift has already happened, and I've just seeing the change. So internally, I mean, the shift is significant in the sense that the commitment level, and I think where ADB stands out, for example, how you compared with other development agencies, is the scale of investment. We are talking about those almost the smallest projects being $100 million, and upwards it can go up to billions, even more. So with that kind of investment, I think there is a lot of opportunity to make change. And at most of MDBs, but I'll just speak for ADB. So we, for example, have this in our climate change action plan. We have a commitment that by 2030, 50% of our total investment needs to be tagged as climate finance. That's a huge commitment to me. That and when we say 50%, I mean, it won't just happen. You can't just write like that. That means you would have to work really hard to develop investments that deliver those outcomes that qualify as climate finance, both on the mitigation side as well as the adaptation side. And I think from the NDC and NAPs and those, how do we navigate that space? Often, I think one of the things we noticed in countries is one thing as in, do NDC and NAP talk to each other? That's one question. But also, we've seen a lot of the times NDC and NAP are outward-facing policies. We've committed to UNFCCC, we are going to do this. But then you look at the National Economic Plan or National Development Plans, often they don't talk to NDC and NAP. They have their own trajectory. And that's where I think we work a lot with the countries to sort of make sure that these talk to both. Of course, in the books we have firmly said that in fact it's now in effect since 2023 that all projects that we do will be aligned with the Paris Agreement. And if they are not in any way, if there is a doubt, basically the board will not approve it. So that's 100% there. but how do we navigate it? And thanks for mentioning that adaptation metrics. I think that's, and you, I think, said it really nicely. That, to us, I think a lot of the time that is where the challenge is. Mitigation being quantitative, very easy to show. Adaptation, we do demonstrate economic benefits, but a lot of the times when we are negotiating with the government on this investment, a lot of the times the economic returns are not enough to justify investment. There is also a need of, or there is also a request from the governments to show financial returns. And often that is easy to show in mitigation because you're making energy and this is the return that's going to come. Adaptation saying, okay, we are going to invest this much in the upward river basins, but the benefits are downstream. And it's hard to show that in that because we are showing this investment is upstream and the downstream is not part of that project. And sometimes that's difficult to explain to the governments. It's very interesting though. And I think these are the challenges we are dealing with. But I think adaptation metrics is the keyword for me.
That's really interesting, and I mean, if I can infer, maybe a little bit, part of what I'm hearing is if maybe adaptation and resilience are a kind of series of trade-offs that may be like particular to the group of institutions and people that are involved. That maybe we're also seeing through your engagement, you're facilitate with the countries. You're trying to facilitate trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation itself. You're reframing climate change as an overarching concept, that this country may need to prioritize much more on the climate mitigation side, and maybe adaptation is not as important or it's a lower priority. Other countries, adaptation is all of it, and it's okay if you burn some carbon. Yeah. So is that like a fair statement of maybe what some of these conversations are like?
Yeah, I think so. For example, I will just give an example of like I'm working in Pakistan right now, and often the pitch, every document you read in from Pakistan is saying we only contribute less than 1% of the total emissions, but we are one of the most vulnerable, top 10, top 5. And that's there. So this is where I think then saying how do we, because these top 5, top 10, or 1%, I think these are very relative numbers. Every ton of CO2 counts. So this is where I think you have to then relate the mitigation goals with the economic development. And if they align, it's very easy to justify investment. And to me personally, I think that's how we should look at it. In developing countries, we don't have resources to do mitigation for the sake of mitigation. In fact, the developed countries are also just doing that. So particularly for developing countries, I think that's we need to make sure, we need to find ways to align mitigation goals with the economic development goals. And only that it becomes easy to justify with the governments. Yeah.
Great, thank you. A question for you, Winston. I have to just say as an aside that part of the reason of the strength of my eyeglasses prescription is probably from reading PDFs of some of the reports that you've written over the years. You've been working in the water space for a very long time and writing a lot of insightful pieces. And my intuition about maybe your work in the World Bank especially has been maybe a stronger emphasis on kind of the longer term trends that are occurring hydrologically that play out across an economy, like the really nice chart that Annette was showing about the connection between hydrological shocks, climate shocks, and GDP. But at the same time, like a lot of these countries, they have, in order to grow, they need energy. And they probably, in most cases, they need greener energy. And I wonder, like, how you've seen maybe, I'm guessing that there's been maybe a more of an integration of mitigation into your work, trying to weld it on or bolt it on or blend into your mitigation work. Can you maybe reflect on that for a minute?
Yeah, good to see you, John and friends. Yeah, I think bolting and bundling and trying to put things together as best as we can has been the name of the game for quite some time. Um, I've been at the World Bank now 20 years, and we've been talking about integration for, as I think everyone in your room knows, for a very, very long time. And IWRM has been sort of the cornerstone of what we are trying to do. I always get frustrated because for precisely the reasons you were describing, John, about the metric and methodological issues around how do we define adaptation. For me, it's always felt like, well, if you work in the water sector, you're always talking about adaptation. I mean, good water management is really adapting to the uncertainty and variable availability that we have by nature. And so, how do you deal with that? So it has always felt a little bit like we're chasing something which is frustrating in the context of this mitigation adaptation conversation. I actually don't know if there are actual trade-offs. I mean, trade-offs in the sense that governments have to allocate resources to do things. But I think there are probably far more opportunities where achieving mitigation objectives align perfectly with adaptation. And again, I'm using my definition of adaptation, which is very broad and might be at odds with some colleagues who are looking at additionalities and more precision. But in general, I feel like, for example, in Central Asia, if we are moving away from a very energy intensive mode of irrigation delivery to one that is less intensive, that provides better services to farmers, then we've achieved both. And I think there are many opportunities to achieve both. Now, the topic of are we integrated enough? Well, obviously no, but at the same time, I want to say that silos are not necessarily bad. We have energy colleagues who their raison d'etre is the GHG emissions reduction thing, and we need to do that, right? We know where temperatures are headed, and if we don't tackle that fully on, we're in trouble. Now, of course, we don't want to build any hydropower if there's not going to be water available, and I hope hydrologic analyses consider these very, very long impacts. But I think the bigger issue is really the adaptation piece. Like other MDBs, we've committed ourselves also to very ambitious targets around lending on climate, as well as the partition. So 50% mitigation and 50% adaptation of all public finance. And the adaptation one is the one that's more challenging. And again, for I suspect all of us in this room, how can that possibly be? Now, I do think, just last thing I want to say on the trade-offs, I think what was said earlier by Mr. Jamali from ADB is absolutely right on in terms of the telling a story about benefits. There's a price on carbon, so it's very easy to talk about financial returns and even economic returns to some degrees on mitigation. But on the adaptation side, far, far more difficult. And I find that a lot of my job here at the bank with my team is pushing the teams to tell a more clear economic story about why adapting to a more, let's say, variable climate is important for farmers, for water supply providers, to wastewater providers, et cetera, to flood and drought managers, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think there's a lot more that needs to be done on the economics of adaptation. And I mean, I'm sure you're very familiar with the Commission's report on that topic. Much more to be done. But so just to conclude, I think, yeah, we need to do much more on integration. I think there's a question about, do you need a Mercedes-Benz version of integration, or maybe is the Ford version of integration good enough? I think after 20 years at the bank, I kind of lean towards the Ford version because sometimes the Mercedes-Benz is a little bit too sophisticated for our clients, too complex for our clients. And, you wait 15 years to finish a project, the climate has already changed. So I think for us to move faster, I think we do need to go with the Ford version of integration. Let me stop there. Thanks.
No, that was great. Thank you. And Michael, I think we met in Glasgow, if I recall correctly. So that was 2021, the Glasgow COP. And the first thing that I was struck by is you're hanging out in the water pavilion, and it was exciting to have someone that was in the corporate space that was really interested in climate policy and what it meant for your business and how your business might also have a larger role to be able to play. And mostly what I saw was you were also listening too, and that wasn't your first COP. I think you told me recently you'd been to Madrid before that, so 2019, I think. So I'm curious. Like maybe my first question for you is, why do you go to COPs?
Yeah, I think my first one was Paris. Yeah, just briefly, Diageo. In case you don't know who we are, Diageo is a consumer goods company. We make alcoholic brands like Smirnoff, Johnny Walker, Guinness, Baileys, Gordon's, and many others. More importantly, about a third of our production is in water-stressed parts of the world, about a dozen countries in the southern hemisphere where we have distilleries and breweries. And of course, we have extensive supply chains in water-stressed areas as well. So the question about going to COP or whatever, I think is, whenever we've been to COPs, we have supported the Water Pavilion since it started, and we haven't supported the equivalent for carbon. I don't know if there is one. But I think, and I'm not talking on behalf of all businesses, clearly, but I think businesses have got into a trap of thinking about climate and thinking carbon. And that's all they think about, and they think about their net zero plan, and they think about their net zero roadmap. And of course, that's hugely important, and Diageo have got that as much as anybody else has got. But they don't think about climate, and they don't think about the interrelations, interdependencies of carbon and climate, and how we can work more in a more integrated approach to that. So it's really interesting talking about this storytelling that Winston and has talked about. That's exactly what we're doing, and we're doing it through metrics. So for every water program we do now, we'll try and measure carbon. We'll also measure biodiversity. We'll also measure gender, and we'll also measure livelihoods and other standardized approach to measuring those co-benefits, what we call co-benefits. It's telling the story about the triple win you can get from investing in nature-based solutions or otherwise. So that's brought to life, for example, in agriculture, where we have extensive agricultural supply chains in sub-Saharan Africa and India and Latin America. And clearly, if we're trying to reduce our Scope 3 emissions, which is related to agriculture, which is a huge part, 90% of our net zero plan is Scope 3, and a lot of that, a third of that is in agriculture. So we've got to reduce their emissions. But we've also got to improve water retention. It's often rain-fed. We've got to improve water quality. So if we introduce regenerative agricultural practices, such as cover crops or buffer zones or whatever it might be, that's going to be a win-win for mitigation and adaptation. But we've got to tell that story. At the moment, we're probably like the banks. We're probably siloed in some respects. I get the point about it helpful to sometimes have silos because it's very focused in delivering. But equally, we have to break those silos in places where we can improve the triple win for us, which is mitigation, adaptation, and then hopefully livelihood improvement, yield improvement, long-term resilience to climate. And that includes investment in WASH as well, investment in providing clean water and sanitation to make our farming communities more climate resilient. So I do think that there's a big step to be taken yet for businesses to move from understanding climate/carbon to start to understanding mitigation and adaptation. And I'm not being rude about businesses, but they've got a lot of things on their plate, and they said, right, I've got the climate thing sorted because I've got a net zero plan, right? The net thing I actually need is a climate transition plan. And that's the opportunity in that climate transition plans that businesses are starting to publish, is where you can start to better tell the story about the integration of mitigation and adaptation. And you'll see that more and more as you see businesses publish their climate transition plans, where they tell the net zero story about how they're going to get to net zero by 2030, 40, 50 or whatever, but also they'll tell the story about how they're adapting their climate change, how they're mitigating their climate risk by investing in adaptation. And that's the key bit. And the final bit I say is the policy piece. And I think that's a bit of a stretch for businesses right now, as you and I have had many conversations about. We would love to be talking to various banks and other investment institutions, but importantly to governments, about how they can strengthen their national adaptation plans. But I can probably count on one hand the amount of businesses that have ever had a conversation with any government around the world about their national adaptation planning, right? I'm talking about the kind of consumer businesses such as ourselves. Maybe infrastructural businesses, of course, have had those conversations. But for us, where we're operating in water-stressed parts of the world and we're impacted by climate change, we want governments to develop and to activate more progressive adaptation planning and investment and regulation. And that's a difficult conversation to have, but we take the advice from the experts in the room as to how we do that, what's the best forums to do that, and what are the best messages. But that's why we go to COP, because, back to the beginning, is because we want to have those conversations and we want to make sure that it's not just about net zero, that we want to talk about water, agriculture, nature, the interdependencies, and the difference between mitigation and adaptation, but the codependencies between the two.
Yeah. Fantastic. This is a really interesting answer. I'd really like to open it up to the audience and take some questions. I'm sure that you all have been hopefully stimulated and provoked maybe a little by the conversation. Maybe I can take like 2-3 questions just to start off with. And if you could, when you raise your hand, if you could say your name, your institution, where you're from, please. So first question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Vogel Ludwig. I work at Wageningen University and IMI, International Water Management Institute. A lot of the stories I hear is actually taking the mitigation as a starting point. And that seems to be the first start. And then we see how we can integrate a bit of adaptation in that. So I was wondering, how do we, a lot of problems in the water sector in terms of floods and droughts, we take actually adaptation first. And then we can see if we can also add mitigation. I was wondering if we need a bit more of that approach.
The idea that we maybe, instead of just kind of optimizing for like one particular issue, like climate mitigation, we need to like present a big picture, a set of options. Is that right? Yeah. One of you maybe want to take. Oh, and so glad you. Is Yara on too? Yeah. Bon dia, Yara. Glad you're with us too. Does one of you want to jump in? Maybe Melissa.
I was thinking, as you asked your question, that we, for instance, have some projects in water-scarce countries like Barbados, where the first we try to address the vulnerability part of the water scarcity, right? But since we work also with utilities, we also work in actions like non-revenue water, reducing non-revenue water, which is a measure that addresses adaptation, because you are going to reduce and better use the water that you have. But also, from the utility standpoint of view, you are more energy efficiency. You have more energy efficient way to use the water, to produce 1 liter of water. So that for instance, is a measure that addresses both adaptation and mitigation. And I also was thinking about like a program that we have designed in the Amazon, where is an adaptation program, but we listed as co-benefit mitigation, because as we try to restore ecosystems in the Amazon, we are also working on carbon sink, that at the end will also address mitigation. So I was thinking of what measures addresses both, and I think these are some examples that we can give you.
And this is a very impressive program too. It's 6 countries, I think, like something like 400 million US, with the Green Climate Fund as well. Yeah, it's an amazing program, and it's called like a water resilience program. But it's interesting that it includes mitigation as well. And I think part of your question is like, how do we make it more complicated, maybe for people that they're starting, like their entry point is climate mitigation. So another question. We can also take questions for our other two speakers too. Yes, sir, please.
Hello, good afternoon. So I'm Rodrigo Fernandes. I'm Global Director of Sustainability from Bentley Systems. It's a software development company. We don't sell cars, okay? We sell software for infrastructure. And 3 points, just 3 comments and one question there. One point is we discussed that we don't have enough metrics for resilience and adaptation. I totally disagree. You just mentioned one, non-revenue water. It's an example. You have many others. It depends on the topic you're addressing. If it's too much water, not enough water, dirty water, whatever. You have indicators for that. And you can use digital technologies for that or whatever. But you can do and you can measure that. And insurance companies know that. They use statistics. They can use all that. That's one point. Second point, I also think that we talk about climate mitigation and adaptation. I believe that we are now in a situation that we understand that it's much, with the geopolitical shifts, we can see that it's much easier to tell a story about climate resilience and adaptation than about climate mitigation. You go to some places, so okay, we are reducing carbon, and so what? Many countries will say, so what? You know, why? Why should I change if the others don't change? But with resilience, it's under your feet. You open the window, we see it. You feel everything. Climate resilience, it's in your face right now. So it's much easier to tell a story and to convince people on that. And I think the third point is regarding ROI. We keep discussing, well, we don't see the economic benefits. So I totally disagree. I also think that we see the benefits of extending life cycle, extending the lifetime expectancy of infrastructure, for instance. It's a great ROI, right? So the avoided costs, the avoided losses, everything can be quantified somehow. I think that's one point. But my question is, what if we start moving from discussing ROI to compare climate adaptation like we do with public health or safety? We don't discuss ROI on that, right? So aren't we discussing a survival thing? Aren't we discussing something that is really something that we need to have instead of just discussing the economic benefits, which we know that are there? So, thank you.
Great. Like a very 3 provocative questions. Maybe from like the case studies, like I was wondering, like especially in the Nordic example, maybe the question about do we already have all of these measurements and variables already? Do you see them already present, that they're off the shelf? Can we treat water quantity as a resilience variable?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because we in the Nordic countries, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, we tend to focus a lot on technology-driven quantitative solutions. And yes, we do have a lot of measurements. We do have a lot of data that's coming, and we're working on getting more data and more information to base our decisions on. But no, in a sense, because I think those things are not going to be enough. There needs to be ways that we need to think to. I'm thinking like there's ways that we can reduce our impact on what's the word? Yeah. So the ways that we can reduce our impact on our environments, but also at the same time grow. And that's the part of the work that I'm doing. It includes that we need to think in terms of reducing our consumption. And and reducing our footprint on the resources that we use. Well, I'll be honest, I was a bit distracted on the chat, so I didn't really get the whole question. But we need to be thinking in terms of both ways how we address adaptation and mitigation. And especially in the Nordics, the technologies are there, but I personally believe it's not going to be enough. So you need to develop other strategies alongside technologies to address this issue. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Zishan. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about how the ADB has been trying to think internally about how to measure adaptation.
Sure. And thank you for those questions. I think, and very good points. And I think just those, I agree. I think the metrics exist. I think there will be, if you do a literature of review, I think there will be like 100 that will be out there. I guess the challenge for us as practitioners is which one to use. And with mitigation, it's a lot more straightforward to plug in and just use it. But when it comes to adaptation metrics, this is why, like you mentioned talking to Argo, we had these engagements in just last 2 weeks. We have done one in Bangladesh, one in Pakistan, one in Philippines, and now we're doing a regional one in Philippines next week. It's mainly to discuss exactly that. What adaptation metrics, and when we say metrics, it's for us it's also investment metrics, as in what is the return on certain adaptation. Yes, the reduction of water. Yeah, but then if you I think if you are on my seat, for example, I think we are talking about. I'm negotiating with the government and who is making a really difficult decision where to invest and where they will get the best return or benefit of this investment for their country, and this is where those becomes when the answers are not so black and white clear. I think that conversation becomes a bit challenging. So I think what we are trying to do is to work with the countries to really explore, and every country is different, very specific, and to first of all to understand what should be the adaptation metrics. Then in the country planning processes, where these should be integrated at planning, finance, Ministry of Climate Change. How do we make them part of it? Because unless they are integrated into the planning processes, it's really, they are not used basically. They're just a fancy report sitting in a shelf. So I think what we are trying to not do is to not have that as a report or something, but more develop something or use some metrics that are integrated into the planning processes. I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Your second question was about that you thought it was maybe not a clear dispute between mitigation and adaptation. Hand. Great. Thank you, Winston, and thank you for the shout out. Winston, please jump in.
Yeah, just to maybe to respond to the two questions. First of all, just to be very clear from my team's perspective, we're managing a water portfolio. We're all in on adaptation and resilience. That's our raison d'etre. Our main objectives are water for food, people, and the planet. And if there's anything we can do on the mitigation side that helps that, then we will do it. So I just wanted to be clear that we are like the other managers on water and our global practice. It's all about adaptation. Secondly, on the second question, I agree with the colleague from ADB. There's loads and loads of metrics, okay? But for example, just because we reduce non-revenue water doesn't necessarily mean we are adapting, right? So you have existing utilities that are underperforming, and by improving that, is that adaptation? And the reason the answer to that question is important is because as a public institution with ADB and all the other MDs, we need to have a very clear methodology an understanding about what is the additionality that our financing is bringing to the adaptation agenda puzzle. And I think this is what Mr. Jamali was trying to allude to, that is actually quite complex when you start thinking about it. And then the last thing I just want to say is on economic benefits. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we can't do it, but keep in mind our education and our health colleagues, those projects do calculate economic benefits, and they have to. Anytime a government is allocating public funds, they're making a decision. They're making actually trade-offs amongst different sectors. And so how do you make those trade-offs? And so this is where I think adaptation, because maybe we haven't told the story or we haven't had robust enough analytics, we often, I think, fall prey to some of the more financially driven sectors such as energy. But again, I think it's doable. I think there's a lot that can be done, particularly in flood and drought adaptation resilience. There's a lot we can do there, particularly on irrigation and with changing patterns with rainfall. I think on water supply and wastewater, the adaptation agenda is not as clear. But for the big water resources, I think there is a lot we can do on the economics. And I hope some of it has been shown earlier. I think SCI, and there's lots of great groups out there, EME, that are doing research in this area.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, another question? Yes, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. I think an interesting reflection on return on investment, especially because, one, we have bankers in the room, and that's the big thing they'll always ask, what's the return on investment? But very much from a WASH perspective, knowing that we always have to demonstrate the dividend in terms of, how is it translating? It's hard, we're looking through it, but then at the end of the day, especially now, I think Winston mentioned it, governments are prioritizing. Everybody needs to prioritize, and a reference becomes important. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Pavin Gala, with World Vision as the Global Director for WASH. But my question actually was around, in the reflection around water, food, water, energy, food nexus, at the moment, if you look at some of the continents, especially when you talk about just energy transition, there's a bit of pushback there, where they're saying, look, we're already dealing with gaps in this space, so it was great to see that reflection from the African continent, from
Absolutely.
Kenya, where we were saying, what is the comparison? But I'd love to just hear from you in terms of, how you're experiencing and dealing with the pushback around it, because governments are saying we need resources to be able to, invest. We're already dealing with an energy gap. What does that mean for this direction as we talk about integration and nexus?
That's a fantastic question. Anderson, would you like to weigh in on that point? My personal experience, a very short story. While we're moving the microphone, I was at a meeting at the World Bank maybe 15 years ago, and someone from the Indonesian government stood up and said to the U.S., like, why are you harassing us about a new coal-fired power plant? Like, we're talking about the carbon emissions that the U.S. generates in drying its laundry each year, and like, we need the energy right now. And really, whose fault is it that we're in this situation? So please.
Yeah, thanks for that very interesting observation. So, with my interaction with many governments in Africa, what they usually say is, you guys develop, right, with those dirty energy. China, the same US, and now you're asking us to leapfrog, to clean sources. And when we ask for money, you just keep promising 100 billion and nothing is coming in. So we have to balance that, leapfrog between transition and the investment. And once we transition, then it means all the investment that we've locked in is now is gone. All the fossil fuel, pipes and everything. So how do we ensure that, once we talk about this just transition, we are actually providing a room for people to actually transition in terms of, going to clean energy, jobs creation, and also in the long term. Because now, if you're talking about, for example, Kenya, Ghana, they just discovered huge oil reserve. and now you are telling them not to exploit and build the economy. So how do you, it's a delicate situation. And now, even with the African Union Commission, they have the energy branch. Now it has moved to, is it Algeria? I have a colleague who is working there, and they're saying that all those things are just politics. They're talking about energy transition, green energy, just politics. But first thing first, if you tell them anything that is contrary to fossil fuel, they will just knock you off. So we have to bring this balance and ensure that it's quite, adaptive and relevant to the current context.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and a question here, Josefina.
Maestro from the Ministry of Ecological Transition of the Government of Spain. We've been talking a lot about water-stressed continents and countries and spaces, and this comes also to the technological solutions that you were talking about. Because, there is less rain-fed, so what do? We do more irrigation. So our response to water stress is to use more water, one. And secondly, the efficiency also that you were talking about. In Spain, the experience is that with efficiency investments, we use more water, not less water. Because in order to make it viable, we need to have more crops. So we have double and triple the crops we do in a year, having water efficiency investments. So this comes back to the matrix issues that you've been discussing about. And I think we need to work out this issue of trade-offs all the time, because it hasn't come here, but all these new users like the data centers, they're coming in, they're pushing in very hard, and they use a lot of water. So the trade-offs, the discussion is going to be fundamental. Thank you.
Yeah, an excellent point. Maybe Michael or Yara, would you like to jump in?
I was actually going to intervene in the previous question, but it is relevant to that question as well, so apologies, I'm sure we'll come to that in a second. But I think the point that was being made about Africa and trade-offs and transition, it's a role that the private sector can play in terms of the private sector often being the GDP contributor, and therefore seeing adaptation and investment in adaptation through an economic development lens and not through a climate lens is something that often businesses can have engagement with governments, wherever we're operating, is to say, there are investment decisions that we're not making as a result of lack of investment in adaptation, right? So seeing it less through a climate or even a mitigation or adaptation piece, but just seeing it through economic growth, which most countries are interested in, and saying, well, actually invest in adaptation as an enabler for economic growth, speak to businesses who are ready to invest but can't invest because the conditions are not right for economic growth because of climate, and therefore see it as any other infrastructural investment you'll make to enable growth of the economy by investing in climate adaptation. So that's just one part of the conversation. Of course, there's a lot more to the conversation than just that, but I do think that those that are encouraging governments to take the right route in terms of investment should engage with the private sector so that they can lend their voice to that discussion. Just one party, it's not any more important than any others, but private sector can, because they, as I said at the start, they're often the driver of economic growth and GDP growth in countries.
Very interesting point. I'd kind of pull two observations off of that. The first one is that adaptation is not just about crisis, it's about growth. And that's a very different narrative than we've been telling. I think it's a good fit with how you're talking about it. And the second is show up at COP. Iara, please, as you have our last intervention as the representative of the COP host, please.
Thank you, John. I think it's interesting thinking and talking about the trade-offs, which is also one way that we are exercising the opportunity cost of our choices. And here I'd like to highlight it again that we need, if you want to fix or to improve the water management, you have to come back to the water cycle, to the equation of the water balance, because some terms are being forgotten. Brazil is advocating for the importance to remember that the vegetation, especially the native vegetation, is an intrinsic component of the hydrological cycle and the water balance, especially regarding evapotranspiration and the deep infiltration. And this information seems completely forgotten. So in which way we are going to to manage the water if you are just taking in consideration one of its component, like the superficial visible one. It's not intelligent from our side. In the same way that a human being cannot take care of only your heart if its I don't know, liver is sick, and I think it is exactly what we are trying to do right now. So I think we needed to improve and to giving a zoom out the way we are working, to rethink this trade-off and this opportunity cost in a way that consider all the water cycle and its fluxes. On the other way, we'll keep looking just, we needed to reserve more water, we needed to extract more groundwater. This is the adaptation, but the water is not being there for everybody in the same time that everybody needs. So I think we need to improve the way we are doing. The way we use it to work is not working. We're not succeeding anymore. So we needed to give this zoom out to improve and to give better answers to all these questions that is here. And I like the way that Mr. Winston mentioned that it's possible to looking for adaptation and mitigation. And in the same way, maybe we need to ask ourselves and our colleagues, how can we adapt and mitigate at the same time regarding to the water? Where are these connected the dots? They exist, but maybe the way we are looking for them, it's wrong. And I'm very happy to see this discussion here. And thank you, John, for bringing this debate, because I think it's a lot for doing this, we have a lot of work to do. So thank you for this.
Thank you very much. If we could give all the panelists and the speakers a warm round. Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. And I'd like now to introduce our final speaker who will give final reflections. I feel like it's always a little bit of a punishment to have to condense a really rich discussion into a few minutes. But Laura Forney is the Water Director for SEI US. The floor is yours, Laura. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, my colleagues and participants, for this amazing session. Before we go into the closing remarks, there is a question that we want to ask the group. So I don't have here. So go back to Slido. I will take 1 minute for this, for people to write. What is the way forward? Thank you. Thank you for the answers. It's been a pleasure hearing everybody talking about this nexus, and I want to thank you for your, what's your name? What's your name? Pavel? I love your question in terms of the transition, right? So one is that we came here to talk about how do we cut emissions while preparing for climate change impacts, right? This nexus of adaptation and mitigation, but also how do we build a transition that is not just green, but that is resilient and equitable and just. We heard from the panel and our colleagues about the importance of this integration, particularly in the trade-offs, and we heard from Finland, Norway, and the cases in Brazil and Kenya on the time and the scale, right? Brazil, where do we need to do these nature-based solutions to have more impact? And the timing of renewables, right? And measuring the trade-off, measuring these components is important, as well as the investments that are needed from the banks. IDB on the importance of building technical capacity in Latin America, from Melissa. I am Argentinian, I am Latina, so I know that, and I know the value of building the capacity. Winston, World Bank, on the integration, that yes, it took a long time, and we need to continue working on it, particularly connecting with economic benefits of adaptation. It seems that what we measure is what gets valued, what gets funded, so we need to be able to measure and do a better job there. Engaging with the private sector, Michael, that connecting the nexus with livelihoods and people, and I love your reflections to our colleagues from Africa. And then here's when you talk about NDCs and NAPs. Yes, they don't talk to each other. They should. Also, national economic plans don't talk to NDCs and NAPs. And I would say, also, NDCs and NAPs don't talk enough about water. Water is the connector. Water needs to be at the center of these documents, and not only talking, but measuring and quantifying these trade-offs. Yara, you mentioned this, and it was opened in the opening session today, of putting water at the center. Water at the center of mitigation. So mitigation needs water, the transition needs water, and adaptation needs water. So our future needs to have also water at the center. I want to share some news. So tomorrow we launch a new focus of our software, WEEP, focus on adaptation, and how we can help on measuring that, as well as other tools like the Water Resilience Tracker. And also we have some seed funding from SEI to work more and continue working on the nexus of adaptation and mitigation. So I'll be happy to talk, and please talk to us about it if you're interested to know more and engaging. So I think I want to thank again the panel and the presenters and the participants for this section. It has been illuminating, and thank you so much. Has a quick announcement.
Thank you. So we've heard discussions about integration and integration of mitigation and adaptation. So this is an initiative that we are undertaking, and you would see these small flyers on your desk as well. We're trying to scan the horizon of where this discussion is going regarding the nexus, and we've already had some responses from the epistemic community and practitioners like you, but we would like to learn more from you, so you can please scan this QR code and take a short survey. We would be presenting the preliminary results in the American Geophysics Union in a town hall at the end of this year, in December, I guess it's it. So, and we're just looking forward to learn and hear from you guys to see where this discourse is going. So thank you so much for this.